Now that we have specified the rationale for the standards-based IEP, let's look more specifically at how the standards interface with IDEA and this concept of accessing the general curriculum.
Well, basically, we have to say that state standards should, and hopefully by this time are, defining the general curriculum. So what is being taught in the general curriculum should have a relationship to the state standards. Now, in IDEA, there is no actual definition of what the general curriculum is, other than to say that it is the same curriculum as for non-disabled students. So curriculum is generally defined sometimes by the SEA, but mostly by the LEA. The state education agency will set the standards. The local education agency then uses the standards to actually develop the curriculum or that which is taught in the classroom. I know this is an older quote, it goes back to 1993, but it's still a good one from Ron Brandt that basically defines the curriculum as that which students are expected to learn and how they are expected to learn it. So another way to look at this is what is meant by the general education curriculum is a definition that I found by perusing the Alabama Department of Education's website. They indicated that the general education curriculum is the full range of courses, activities, lessons, materials that are routinely used by the general population of a school. So they're not necessarily instructional strategies, but it is the materials, the activities, the lessons, the courses, the course of study. That is the general education curriculum. The other key component here is access. What do we really mean by ensuring that students have access? And what we really mean, again, is participation. Being able to participate in a meaningful way in the knowledge and skills that make up the general education curriculum. I like to focus on the concept of meaningful here a little bit because oftentimes we think, well, we'll just put a student with a disability into the general classroom. Therefore, they're mainstreamed, they're included. But if they don't have the skills to really understand what's going around them, do they really have access to that curriculum? So we need to think about what will allow them to have meaningful access.
More and more we hear references to this idea that standards drive the curriculum. What exactly is meant by that from the IEP perspective?
Well, standards are the basis for the curriculum. They provide instructional accountability. In other words, instead of me as a teacher deciding that I'm going to teach this unit because I've always done it, because I love it. I love turtles, and so I'm going to teach a unit on turtles. I need to make sure that what I'm teaching is connected to those standards because that's what students are going to be assessed on. So there's an instructional accountability there. The standards drive the content of the instruction, and ultimately, when we use the standards to also then drive the IEPs and the curriculum that we're going to teach that's going to be the part of the program that's driven, say, by special education, that specialized instruction, then that also ensures that we can support instruction in the least restrictive environment. Standards define the expectations for all students, whether they have disabilities or not, and they create that structure for linking the IEP to the general curriculum. So let's review a little bit, again, why connect IEPs to standards. First, there is this high-stakes accountability. There is the expectation that all students are going to meet certain performance goals and indicators, and that includes students with disabilities. So we have to be focusing our IEPs towards the standards to ensure that our students are able to achieve those high expectations. Second, if we're using the standards as the basis for our IEPs, and then ultimately the instruction that they get in from the special education program, it ensures access to the general curriculum. Third, it helps us to ensure that students are getting educational benefit, because ultimately this will be the reason they are able to graduate or not graduate. And that ultimately is the ultimate educational benefit. The fourth reason would be that it promotes a single system of education. We no longer have special education over here with its language and general education over here with its language, but rather we have one system of education and we're talking a common language. Another reason is that it really encourages greater consistency from school to school. If school A is using standards to drive the IEPs and the student moves to a different district and school Y, and they're also using the standards to drive the IEP, chances are that they will understand the goals and the objectives or the instructional program that the IEP is based on much more consistently if we're using the same language. Finally, it really forces us to assume more for our students, not less. It's really best for all kids. So now I want you to take a little time and think and discuss for yourself. How have standards shaped the curriculum in your school? So first question is, how are you using the standards in your school to shape your curriculum? The second question I want you to be thinking about is, how are you currently using the standards to develop IEP goals? So again, 2 questions. Take a little time, pause, think about those 2 questions, jot down some notes, and then we'll come back.